Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks a lot for having me again. Always like coming to the YF&R conference myself. As Shane said, I'm Jordan Dux. I handle our federal policy at Nebraska Farm Bureau. So based in Lincoln, but spend quite a bit of time in D.C. taking different groups there, going on there, trying to represent you all in Washington and try to get certain supportive legislation passed. And so I'm going to try to run through a couple of things fairly quickly. And then I'll conclude and then open up time for questions. If you've got a burning question or I went over something way too fast and you want to interrupt me, that's perfectly fine, not a big deal at all. So just interrupt me and we can go from there. We are at the beginning of a new year, and I guess I forgot to wish everyone not only a happy new year, but a happy government shutdown day, right? Big deal in Washington. Now, at midnight last night, the federal government ran out of funds. Certainly a large political battle taking place in Washington where we can't come to an agreement on funding. From an official Farm Bureau standpoint, we are certainly supportive of keeping the federal government open, doing the basic work that the federal government needs to do. Take off the Farm Bureau hat for a minute. I think that, certainly from our standpoint, the media loves to get in the middle of all this and talk about how big of a deal it is. At the same time, we all made it here this morning. We all got up. I think we'll make it for a couple days, as we always do. Government shutdowns really are not unprecedented. They're not historically unprecedented. If you look back throughout not only modern history, but throughout the history of this country, it happens. I think Jimmy Carter had one all 4 years of his presidency. We make it through. But certainly there are things that are closed. National parks are closed, but the basic functions of government, well over half of the federal workforce is at work and will go to work on Monday if things aren't solved. A lot of the basic USDA functions are there. Rural development's basically shut down, but meat inspection and all that type of stuff still goes. But from our standpoint, we certainly hope that a funding bill can be brought forth and agreed to. This one really was a battle over immigration. That's really the large part of it. I think that the Democrats in Congress wanted to work on the DACA issue. The folks who came to this country who were given status under the Obama administration, given a certain legal status, and President Trump removed that through an executive order a few months ago. And so that's really where the middle of this, where the battle is here. And so from our standpoint, and we can talk about immigration if you'd like to, but from our standpoint, it doesn't make anyone look good when we have these types of things and these types of arguments, and it's certainly unfortunate. But we all made it here. We'll all make it tomorrow. So we'll see what happens. But I want to talk about kind of the highlight or the topic of what I wanted to hit on is not only what was printed, which is what you can expect from Washington in the new year. But in order to do that, in order to fully look at what we can expect, we have to remind ourselves what happened last year. And a really big thing happened, especially for agriculture at the end of last year, and that is the passage of tax code reform. From our standpoint, we were very involved in the passage of this bill. I handed out a list that we had compiled for folks toward the end of last year. But from our standpoint, from an agricultural standpoint, there is a lot to like in this bill. A vast majority of farmers and ranchers are going to experience a tax decrease, and that's always positive. And so if you look through, and I'll hit on a couple of highlights to this one, if you look at the basics of the income tax side of things, the tax rates across the board were reduced. From the bottom end of things to the top end of things, every tax rate was reduced a little bit. For the first time ever in our tax code, we have now a pass-through rate. So for pass-through businesses, which would be sole proprietorships, which is a majority of agriculture, S-corps, as well as partnerships, you now have the ability to initially deduct 20% of your income, of your taxable income, and then your income is subject to the individual income tax rates. That is certainly a positive standpoint from a positive thing from our side of things. C Corps now go from what was the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world at over 35-36%. It's now dropped down to a flat 21% tax rate. That is another positive thing. We're seeing, I think, the benefits of that across the economy. You've seen the stock market done what it's done. You've seen the announcements from Apple just last week of substantial investments back into the U.S. economy. They're taking money that they had stored offshore. Because of the high U.S. tax rate, they're bringing it back. 20,000 new people that Apple's going to hire over the next 5 years. It's not all because of tax code reform. They've been clear on that. I think every company's been clear on that. You've heard the $1,000 bonuses that a lot of larger corporations are handing out. It's not all because of tax code reform, but it certainly was a player. The stock market, there's a lot of things that impact the stock market, but if you look at, I think the general opinion is we'll have to wait and see as to how truly impactful this tax code reform bill was for the general economy. But from our standpoint, just on the income tax side from the income tax side, it's certainly a benefit. Now, if you look at the other pieces of it, as we move down kind of this top 10 list, you have an increase of the ability to invest money back in your businesses, in our opinion, has gotten better. Section 179 that a lot of people in agriculture use, a lot of businesses use to buy a piece of equipment toward the end of the year, that some folks not only use to invest that back in their business, but if there's a need to maybe reduce some taxable income, you have that ability. That number increased from $500,000 to a standard $1 million. And so that was certainly positive from our standpoint. It's probably not going to be the biggest impact on agriculture. The $500,000 generally was accepted and generally was enough for most farmers and ranchers, but an increase there is certainly beneficial. And you kind of have the other pieces of the ability to bring down your taxable income. You've got bonus depreciation. If you had more than, say, where the Section 179 limits are, you then look at bonus depreciation as a way to immediately write off business expenses. You have also the depreciation schedule on farm machinery. Again, if you go above some of those limits, we brought that down from 7 to 5 years. And so certainly the ability of businesses to invest money or put capital back into their businesses, we think is improved under this piece of legislation. A big question that we got over and over again, and I'll confirm it, as we were literally getting phone calls every day. Farmers under this legislation can still fully deduct their property taxes under this legislation. There is a limit for individuals, but if you file a Schedule F, a Schedule S, or a Schedule C, if you're a C Corp, S Corp, or you're in a sole proprietorship, you are considered a business, you bring in business income, you are allowed to fully deduct your property taxes. There is a $10,000 limit for property for individuals who do not have business income. A typical, I'll put myself there, I'm an employee, I work for Nebraska Farm Bureau. I am limited now to a $10,000 deduction for combined my property taxes, my local property taxes, as well as my state income tax combined. So a $10,000 limit there. But for farmers, the ability is not limited. You have business income. That is a business expense. You can fully deduct your property taxes. So positive there. There was a possibility of that going away. And so we advocated very, very hard for that to be maintained. And I know Congressman Smith, who is on the House Ways and Means Committee, our 3rd District Congressman, was in the middle of that fight, very, very much so. Actually, a lot of these provisions, he was in the middle of that fight. And so we were very grateful for that. But fully deduct property taxes under this bill as well. Doubling of the estate tax exemption, something that's been around for a long time that we have battled. I think the exemption is very good. We certainly would like to see it gone away completely, but with a $5 million excuse me, a $11 million exemption now, I mean, that certainly covers really a majority of agriculture. The expansion of cash accounting. There has been push to try to eliminate the ability of you all to utilize cash accounting as farmers and ranchers. That actually was expanded, so we made that better. They did limit 1031 exchanges to only capital or to real property. So you can't use it on machinery. That's one thing that was used a lot. Some people use it on livestock. You can't do that anymore. We think the Section 179 limit increase there probably makes up for what benefit was there. The ability to continue to deduct business interest continues. That was something, again, we fought. That was a possibility of going away. The individual mandate for health insurance went away, and the ability to fully deduct your medical expenses was maintained. I'm going to skip down over the net operating loss. There were some changes there. If you want to read through that, that's certainly something to talk to your accountant about if you work through that side of things. But we've seen probably over the past 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 days a lot of questions on the new changes to Section 199, or when it comes to farmers selling their crops to a co-op. Section 199 was eliminated in this tax bill, but it was replaced with something, and the co-ops worked really hard to get a replacement in there for something, and so that's what they got, which essentially what this provision does, if you've seen some of the news about it, there's a lot of questions about it, it allows farmers to deduct fully the gross sale that they made to a co-op. If you go back to what I talked about with individual income tax rates, sole proprietorships, S Corps, C Corps, you deduct 20% of your net income. With the co-op one, with this replacement, you are allowed to again deduct your gross sales to the co-op, a substantial change. And so there's a lot of talk as to whether or not it's more beneficial for you to sell your crop to a co-op to take advantage of that. Even for livestock producers, if you feed your corn or you feed your soybeans, it may be more advantageous to sell it to a co-op just to buy it back in order to take advantage of that. I'd caution everyone from getting really on edge on this particular provision yet and start making massive business changes on this as of today. And the reason I say that is because both the organization that represents the co-ops as well as a number of members of the Senate have said that they would like to make some changes of this, given some concern that's out there from not only, say, the ADMs of the world and the Bungys and Cargills of the world, but also of ethanol plants and feedlots who would essentially be at somewhat of a disadvantage because this exists. There's talk about changing that or fixing it, so I would not, because there's a possibility that they're going to try to fix it. I don't know how they do it because they need 60 votes to do it, and it's hard to get 60 votes for anything, hence the shutdown today. But I would certainly talk to your accountant before you start making some really large changes as to where you're selling your grain this year on this particular provision. So if we have more questions on that, I can certainly try to answer those. But right now, that's kind of where we're at. And that's what I would do, is certainly kind of see what they're offering at the co-op. Don't accept less from your crop to sell to a co-op. Just take advantage of a tax provision that may not be there tomorrow. So that's kind of my point there. That's kind of it on taxes. Any questions on taxes before I move on real quick? I know there's a lot there. Taxes are dense. It's difficult. But go ahead.
Sale or 2018 crop sale or 2019 crop sale?
For this one, for like the co-op provision, it'd be for 2018. None of this took place last year. So when you file your taxes for this year, you're still filing under the old tax code. So everything I talked about, all the good stuff, it doesn't happen until you file next year's taxes. So remember that too. And so there is, I mean, it may be advantageous for some folks to hold over income. I mean, to think about that as you talk. Again, talk to a professional. Don't listen just to me. But go ahead, Ken.
Okay, I've got one question.
Yes.
And it's been brought up to me this past week.
That doesn't mean I'll be able to answer it.
And I don't know whether you'll be able to answer it or not.
Okay.
It deals with the state issue almost more than the federal, but the
Okay.
1031 exchange
Yeah.
and used machinery.
And how that works
How
with
that
personal
affects
property taxes?
Personal property taxes.
We're looking into that. We're trying to see as to how that impacts. So essentially, with 1031 exchanges and the ability of you to not only write off all of your property, I can't couch it as well as how that goes, but there was essentially a chance that you all were going to end up paying more in personal property taxes because that's the long and short of it, without getting too into the weeds on it. I don't know if that's the case yet, or if that matters so much with what everything, if that evens out, right? You have to look at this from a larger standpoint. That was what the trouble was in getting this thing passed, is when you start talking about simplification of the tax code, you start talking about taking out different provisions. And so we get really upset about the loss of my particular provision that helps me, but then you look at the overall rates and the overall rates all went down. So how does that affect? You have to look at it from a larger picture standpoint. And so we haven't decided and haven't determined whether or not that is as big of a hit as what maybe it's feared to be. So we're working on that. I would also advertise real quick, any member in this room here will be getting an email, hopefully, and if not, you can go to our Facebook page, web page, however you want to do it. We are going to be hosting a members-only webinar with a CPA, with Tina Barrett with Nebraska Farm Services, Inc. Tina knows taxes far better than any human being that I've ever met thus far, and she knows them extraordinarily well, and is going to walk through this thing with people, and we'll offer some examples for folks, and actually is going to address that question and a couple of other things. And so I'd encourage you to jump on that webinar. It's going to be on January 30th at 7 p.m. Central. January 30th on 7 p.m. Central. You have to register for it, and I think that link will be up on our website pretty soon if it's not there already. We are limited to the first 100 people, I will tell you, but I think another thing we're going to do, try our first one, is possibly a Facebook Live event and do a little bit larger push to a larger group of people outside of just the membership. But for members right now, January 30th at 7 p.m. Central, Tina will be talking on there, and we'll go through really in detail what folks can expect moving forward here. So if I can't answer a question, I know Tina can. Any other questions before I move on to the next thing? Yes, go ahead.
I'm not 100% sure on how the estate tax works.
Mm-hmm.
Is that on the total value then of the estate, or is that, say, per share?
So that's actually a good question. It is on the total value of the estate, but if you look at agriculture has some special exemptions that bring down the value of the estate. And so that $11 million exemption is per person and is transferable. So now if you look at a married couple, the exemption now goes to $22 million. And so in agriculture, because it is difficult to sell a share, it's not the same as a regular business, it's a lot more difficult, the value of the estate is brought down on a percentage basis, given there's some tax calculations to how they do that, but there are things that is brought down. And so it is the total value of the actual estate is how they calculate estate taxes.
All right, and then is that effective on death or settlement?
At death.
At death.
At death, yes. Yes. Other questions? All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Farm Bill, moving into kind of the picture of what we can expect for 2018 and what I'm going to spend a lot of time on and what I've spent a lot of time on actually for the past couple of years. I was selected 2 years ago to serve on an American Farm Bureau Farm Bill Advisory Committee, a task force, whatever you want to call us, to examine this Farm Bill and what we can expect for the next one, what we'd like to see for the next one. And from our standpoint and from what the meetings we've had on Capitol Hill already, don't expect a big transformative farm bill. What we have in terms of programs, probably going to be what we have for programs moving forward. So don't expect big changes to programs. The Ark County program will still likely exist. The PLC program will likely exist, but both of them will probably be changed a little bit, especially Ark County. It's some minor things. I know there was a lot of concern about county-to-county disparity in terms of, my county I just live just the west of this other county, and they got $20 more an acre for Ark County payments than what I did. That's certainly something that I think is being addressed. There's some things that we can do to fix that. The data set that USDA used to make those payments, to calculate those payments, was built on NAS surveys. And I know there's a lot of folks out there that have questions as to how accurate some of those surveys are. That's why we encourage folks to fill them out, please, and be as accurate as possible, because it matters. It absolutely matters as to the numbers you provide. But I think they're going to make a change to maybe utilize RMA data on that to provide a more accurate measure as to where numbers are. I think there's also going to be some changes made to the Ark County program in terms of the sign up. So before, we had some issues where when you sign up, if you don't have an FSA, all the payments are dependent upon where you FSA out of, where you do your FSA business. I think there's going to be a push, given the concerns that folks had that maybe didn't have an FSA office in their county. I think one of the changes that we're pushing for is to have the calculation based upon where the land is actually physically located. You wouldn't think that that's that big of a deal, but it absolutely is a big deal. And so from our standpoint, that's something we'd like to see. Outside of some minor tweaks to the commodity title, probably not seeing a big change there. I think there's some changes we'd like to make to our county also into the price that's used, or the percentage of payment, the percentage of the payment that's made, the percentage of the land that is determined to make the payment, I should say. It's determined based on 85% of your base acres, and so we would like to see either a bump up in the payment rate per commodity, or an increase of that 85% number to maybe a higher commodity, just to make the Ark County program more attractive. If you look at where crop prices are at, if you look at where those Ark County payments have been calculated over the past several years, we've had some pretty significant Ark County payments in this state. Those will likely go away this year in 2018, or substantially reduced, and then completely go away in 2019. The Ark County program is a revenue program. It looks back over the past 5 Olympic year average, and we've lost those high payment years. Those $8 corn years are out of the calculation now, and so when you're comparing old to new, the new price is pretty much where we're at, and that seems to be where we're headed, and you're probably not going to trigger a payment there. And so I know a lot of folks are looking at more of the PLC approach, the target price approach, as to maybe a level of protection. I talk about all that to also tell you that from the policy that we've passed, and from what we continue to hear from folks, is that Title I payments are fine. The federal crop insurance program continues to be the most important part, and that is the number one priority that we have, is the protection of federal crop insurance. There's been a lot of studies actually out this past week talking about what happens if you start tweaking that program. There's a lot of talk of payment limits. There's a lot of talk of prohibiting larger farmers from entering in or allowing subsidization of their federal crop insurance like everyone else. The studies are showing that that's extraordinarily problematic downstream. That when you start kicking out those larger farmers that actually, on average, are less risky than a smaller producer, you tend to increase the price of the policies for everyone else, because you're not able to spread that risk out. And so that's a substantial problem. And so we'd like to maintain the crop insurance program as is. And quite frankly, when you look at it, it gets a little frustrating when you talk to members of Congress and you hear about folks wanting to make some little tweaks and changes to the federal crop insurance program when it's about this much of the federal budget. You notice there's no space between my fingers. It is an unbelievably small percentage of the federal budget. It's likely one of the most popular farm bill programs we've ever had, and yet we want to make some little tweaks and changes to it that will effectively ruin the program. It makes no sense for us, and we're continuing to fight for that, and I think we've got a chance to have a battle on our hands. You're going to continue to hear folks from the environmental community, from the animal rights community, and everywhere else. We continue to get attacked there, but that is our number one priority, and that's something we talk about a lot. Not that there aren't changes that can be made here or there, but when you look at the changes that are being offered and some changes that are being suggested, it's not going to be good for the program, and thus it's not going to be good for you. So that's going to be something we talk about. Conservation programs, we get some questions about those. Not big changes there. We'd like to see some changes to make them more user-friendly. We're not an organization that supports increasing the CRP cap. There's been a lot of talk on that, is to increase the CRP acreage cap. That's not going to be us. We have some concerns on the pollinator program that's out there under the CRP program that gives folks a considerable bump in their CRP contract payment for throwing some pollinator plant seeds out there. It's making places, not as much in Nebraska, but places like Iowa, you've got some older retired farmers who see an opportunity to get $300+ an acre for CRP pollinator program, and they're throwing in 500-acre tracts of ground into that program. That's a little unnecessary from our standpoint. So we'd like to see some changes there. Generally speaking, again, I think the livestock industry is looking at some changes to a vaccine bank for foot and mouth disease. It has a pretty significant cost associated with it, and so trying to see how that works is going to be interesting. But in terms of the big transformative things you're going to see in the Farm Bill, it's not really stuff that affects Nebraska a whole lot. The dairy producers want to see substantial changes to their program, a program that they developed that in a lot of ways doesn't work for them. Crop insurance you all pay for. That's the way it works. We're not expecting to get more out of the program than we get in, but the federal government has made billions of dollars from the dairy producers on their program. It's not worked correctly, and so we're pushing for some changes there. If you really want me to get into the intricacies of dairy policy, I can do that. I'd rather not. So we'll just skip over to the next one, and we'll talk about cotton is the other one, which the cotton producers are looking at making some substantial change to their program as well, a program also that they wrote themselves that has had some problems. So there's going to be some changes there on Farm Bill, but budget's going to be the biggest point of conversation, and anything we do, anything we propose, any idea we have, the next question from Senate and House Ag Committees always has been and will continue to be for the rest of this year is how much does it cost? And so we will see, they're talking about a February 14th markup date in the House Ag Committee, a Valentine's Day markup, not really something I think my wife's going to be thrilled about, but we'll see how that goes. So, but that's where we're at on Farm Bill. Any Farm Bill questions? Yes, Darren.
On the conservation program,
Yeah.
acres coming out of CRP, for guys that are looking at going back into CRP, is there any way that they're trying to work with local governments on tax assessment where your property taxes may go down if you have a CRP program? Then on Black County CRP, and it could be row crop ground, it's taxed.
Right.
There's no, if it's in CRP, there's no break where your CRP thing for taxes is relatively similar.
Right. I know we've looked at that in the past, and I can't say we've had that conversation lately, Darren, but it's something I think that we can look into again as we get into talking about this more. Because you're not the only person that's talked to me about that this year, actually, now that I think about it. So yeah, we can have that conversation again, see what we're looking at there. Any other questions? Yep, Ken.
What are you hearing on FMD and FAS funding?
So we as an organization have always supported the programs. We've never supported an increase in the funding of them just because they're always targets for cuts. And so and it's not that we don't support them, we've just always kind of keep the funding where it is. But for the trade promotion programs, for FMD funding and MAP funding, we actually just passed a resolution at our annual meeting in Nashville that supports increased funding for those programs. I think it goes back to the thing I had said earlier where I think they're going to ask how much does it cost, how much do you want? I don't know where we're going to find the money. So I think that we'll have to see. They're extraordinarily valuable. They make a lot of sense. For every dollar you get in, you get how much out of it? 3, 4, 9, 10. I don't know. It's far more of a bigger return on investment for trade promotion programs in terms of how much we spend on them. And so we'll try to fight that battle. We'll see what happens. But I think the biggest problem is going to be that it costs money. With everything, it's going to cost money.
And, well, I think it's FMD.
Mm-hmm.
It's under the 50 million level.
Correct.
That the budget committee said that they don't have that current funding even. That we've got to find extra funding to even keep the current level.
Right.
Are you hearing on that?
I haven't heard a lot on that one yet, Ken. I guess that's a conversation that we need to have again as to where we need to find more money even for the programs to even function as is. But that doesn't make me feel any better to try to find another $36 million for a program when they're telling us they have no money for anything. So we'll see what happens there. Any other Farm Bill questions? All right, I want to go on 2 final things here real quick, and then I can take more questions on anything else you guys have questions on. But I want to talk about some regulatory issues, which is another big thing that we have worked on, especially over the past year, past 8 years, 9 years, however long I've been here, is not only the WOTUS issue, which we have started that process of getting rid of it, but it's not done yet. EPA now has to write a rule, so they can't write a rule to make it worse again. That sounds a little complicated and a little confusing. But what we have essentially is in order to repeal a regulation, you've got to introduce basically a rule to repeal the rule, and you got to write a new rule. And we want to make sure the rule itself makes sense, it's legally defensible, and so we're in that process right now. The federal government, the EPA, has introduced a rule to repeal the Waters of the United States rule, the WOTUS rule, and now we're in the process of trying to work with them to develop a rule that makes sense for agriculture, that understands the basics that we all know, that dry land isn't water. You'd think that would be relatively understood in Washington. It isn't, but that's something we've spent a lot of time on, and I think we're headed the right direction there. A thing that we've gotten a lot of questions on and that folks need to be a little bit prepared for on Monday is a rule dealing with CERCLA. And it's about livestock producers reporting hazardous emissions of ammonia and I think it's hydrogen sulfate. And we've had a lot of questions as to how many head does it need to have in order for you to have to comply with this whole thing. This whole thing started with a law that Congress passed that was never intended for livestock producers, like a lot of things. And the Humane Society of the United States and other folks sued the federal government and said you had no right to issue an exemption for agriculture. You need to have them follow the rule. EPA fought that for a while. And the courts have essentially said that that's true. Livestock producers were never truly exempt from the law, which is funny that the world we live in, last time I checked in this country, the idea of what isn't listed in the Constitution directly is inherently not subject to regulation, but that's not the world we live in now. So livestock producers are technically likely going to be on Monday subject to CERCLA regulations where you're going to have to report if you have livestock. That's not just a feedlot, but that's also cows on grass. You need to determine whether or not you have the emission releases, the daily emission releases, in order to qualify for someone that has to report. How do I do that? That's a really good question. On EPA's website, they have worksheets you can go through. And you can fill that information out. They're not EPA worksheets, they're university worksheets, actually University of Nebraska worksheets. And you can determine what your releases are roughly for what we understand them to be given the science that we understand with how those releases work. There's a lot of questions as to how legally defensible those are. There's a lot of questions as to how accurate those numbers are. It's a confusing thing. And so what I will tell you is that you need to determine that for yourself. And this requires you, this is going to sound like the most ridiculous lawyer lobbyist talk you're ever going to hear, and I really apologize. But on Monday, the court will likely release the rule that producers are going to have to do this. And essentially, you're reporting this to the EPA, to emergency management folks. You're essentially calling the Coast Guard to tell them you're doing this. And the Coast Guard's not going to be able to pay attention to boats that they're supposed to look at because livestock producers from Nebraska are going to be calling them about their ammonia releases that we think are happening. So you need to go on the EPA website if you'd like to, if you feel you are subject to the regulation, and determine that for yourself. Everyone understand that? It's fantastic. I love telling people that you need to come up with a number that is probably close. We don't know. We really don't know what they're going to do with the information, but you need to do it by Monday. That's the best thing we can be to tell members and how to be helpful. But that's essentially where we're at right now. It's really troubling. It is unfortunate that that is the direction we're at. For once in a very long time, this is not EPA's fault. EPA has been very helpful with this, and if you're really frustrated and confused by this whole thing, like everyone probably is, help us fight this. And the only way we can fix it is through legislation. And so over the next 2 weeks, we're probably going to have legislation dropped in the Senate and the House, and we're going to try to repeal this. And so we'll have an action alert when the bills are dropped. We'll send information out to people, but you need to make that determination for yourself, but what I'm telling you is that it is a legal liability. No matter if EPA doesn't check you or does check you, it is technically a legal liability for you all out there. If someone wants to come after you, they can ask and do that. And so what we need to do is fix it. we need to fix it. Because this is probably one of the more frustrating rules I've had to deal with, and that includes WOTUS, because I've got people asking me what to do, and what I told you is what you need to do. And it is helpful not at all. So if you are signed up for our Newswire publication that comes out every Friday, it's an email that we send out every Friday. It gives a rundown of a lot of things we're working on. It included a link on there with a pretty good fact sheet on this issue of what you need to do and how you need to apply for, you need to send your name in, you need to do this and all that. So if you feel that you are subject to the regulation, and you want a copy of where to go or want some more information, let me know and we can get that to you. But that is clear as mud for everybody, right? Okay, perfect. The last thing I want to talk, go ahead.
Who came up with that? The EPA did.
So this was never meant for agriculture. This was about ammonia releases from other things, industrial ammonia releases, things that probably should be monitored, not for agriculture. It's like everything. We live in a world where if it doesn't explicitly say you're not regulated, we don't have the assumption that you shouldn't be regulated. The assumption is that you should be if we didn't say you're specifically exempt. It doesn't make sense for me. So, any other questions? Yes?
How are they going to monitor that, or is it just random selection?
Great question. That's a great question. Next question. We're having a conference call with the EPA on Monday. We had one on Friday. They don't know how to, it's a struggle with how this whole thing is going to work. It's really hard because they can't tell you how many animals would be subject to it. They can't tell you how to calculate it. They can give you some information, but yeah, it's a struggle. I feel really bad because, again, I can't tell you what to do or how to do it that terribly well. Yes, ma'am?
How do you sign up for the Newswire?
So you can go on our website and look for that, and you can sign up for it there. And if you'd rather me just do it for you, write down your email address and I'll get you on there. Your name and email address, and we'll get you signed up for it. Any other questions on that one? I'm going to go on one more thing because we have a lot of questions on it, and that's the electronic logging device mandate, which folks we're working on a delay right now, under a delay right now. Hours of service is probably a larger issue here, and from our standpoint, we've had a lot of livestock haulers that are very concerned by this. If you are a farmer and you're hauling your own animals, you're not doing it as a commercial trucker, you're exempt from all this stuff already, so you don't need to worry about it. You're still exempt from having a CDL and all those things from what we worked on a few years ago. But if you're a commercial livestock hauler, we're working right now under a delay. Senator Fisher has been very active on this issue and working directly with the Secretary of Transportation on trying to come up with a better way to move forward on this, understanding the needs of the livestock industry. And so we're working on it. I can't tell you with certainty that we're going to fix it tomorrow, but we're going to keep pushing for delays until we find a path forward to fix it. Again, it's not just the device itself that's the problem. It's the hours of service limitations for livestock haulers that are the real problem here. And actually, we're working on a meeting with Senator Fisher now with some transportation folks. Senator Fisher had the Secretary of Transportation here this summer. We brought it up. We talked to her about it. I think they're willing to work with us. We're just trying to find a way to make it make sense. If that's a exemption for livestock, we'll see. If that's trying to extend some hours of service to make sense, we'll see what happens there. But the problem here is that you're limiting your market, right? You're limiting the size of your market when you can't move animals from point A to point B. And that's what we don't want to have happen. So that's the biggest issue there, and we'll keep working on that one too. So just to provide you an update, we're still under an exemption now. I think we have an exemption for, it's a couple more weeks now. It's a couple more, that's maybe a month or two now. March 18th, yeah. I had the ELD exemption and the Circle of One run together in my mind. I keep forgetting. Thank you, Ken. Yes, Darren.
Are they going to open that up more than just livestock exemptions? Because on that fertilizer dealership, is having fertilizer brought in, the truck got within a mile of the fertilizer dealership, and he had to shut down for the day because he was out of hours. And he was a mile away from his destination.
It's really touchy, especially when you throw fertilizer in there, then you've got hazardous material. That's even worse, Darren. The trucking industry is really,
There's no common sense.
I know.
Their hours of service
I know. Well, we had to fight so hard for the exemption, for the ag exemptions from CDL and medical testing and all that stuff we got, because we got hit by the trucking industry really hard. That agriculture, I mean, we had to defend those because you had folks trying to think that farmers are going to throw an 18-year-old on there that has never driven a truck and just let them go. It doesn't give anyone the right to drive an unsafe vehicle unsafely. And so I think we worked out some pretty decent rules for farmers. But yeah, I hear you. I'm just going to tell you that it's been really, for as easy of a fix as what this maybe could be with this one, because you have the double whammy of a hazardous material hauling and the hours of service thing, I struggle to see us making a lot of headway there. I'll just tell you honestly, Darren. But it's something I know, some common sense into trucking regulations, it would certainly make sense from our standpoint.
A mile from a destination.
I know.
So frustrating, even if you're sitting on the side of the road.
I know.
Care.
Because then you've got fertilizer just sitting on the side of the road. That's not safe either. So I hear you. I hear you. Other questions on that one? Go ahead, Ken.
What are you hearing on, I've seen a lot of articles, like if you're going to a horse show, or like a purebred breeder that is delivering their breeding stock to a customer that's over 150 miles away, that they're going to have that EDL on their pickups.
I've seen a lot on that too, and I guess I haven't. My family's involved in the show pig industry, and I haven't told Dad that one yet. So I get yelled at enough stuff, and I haven't quite broken that news to him yet. I'm not sure on that one yet, Ken. I'll be honest. I haven't had a chance to dig into that side enough yet to see how valid that is. I'm assuming it is, but yeah. I mean, I think that all is included in there of things that we need to fix, because that just makes no logical sense. Some sort of common sense regulation in here would be good. And again, I'm not saying it just to give her props, but I'd say Senator Fisher has been on top of this, of really trying to push the Department of Transportation into coming up with something of a fix here. And certainly something I think we're prepared to work on. I think I'm headed to Washington in a couple weeks to meet with Department of Transportation folks to talk about this, to try to find something to fix it. Other questions on that stuff? Okay, now that I've thoroughly depressed everyone with the happenings that are going on in Washington, I want to say that we certainly, in closing, before I open up to more questions, or do we have any more time? We're about done, aren't we? Any more questions on that before I close? On anything? Any federal thing that's been itching in your brain that you just wanted to ask someone that I may not be able to answer? Okay. The thing that we always try to close with, that I always try to close with, is just to say thank you to you all. Thank you for coming to this conference. Thank you for being involved in this organization. I don't do anything unless the members tell us to do it. And it's a unique policy development process that, in my opinion, is the envy of a lot of organizations. That is a bottom-up, not a top-down policy development process. Everything that I've talked about, every position that I've talked about, came from individual members like you all. We just got done with our annual meeting in Nashville a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, last week, whatever it was. It's all running together anymore. It certainly is a pleasure to work for you all, and I just appreciate all the work that you all do. Thank you for showing up, because that's how things happen. None of this stuff happens, none of the fixes to any of these things happen unless you all show up and try to make a difference on them, sharing those individual stories, as we talk about in agriculture all the time, sharing those individual stories about how regulations impact you, as to how we can make a farm bill better for you. All of those types of things matter here. And so if there's ever a time where you all have an idea, have a thought, have a question, that's why I'm here. That's why all the Nebraska Farm Bureau staff are here. Let us know how we can help. So thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.